Today I'm gonna break down how I mix my songs and process my vocals.
Moving, move my wrist, I'm whipping too hard. Bringing bass, I'm wrapping my arm. Income page, I'm wrapping my heart. Eyes on up, I'm looking at stars. Guess I'm not too far. When I reach on out, I can buy that air from the company making us cars.
Before I start mixing, the biggest thing is levels. I think leveling is one of the most important aspects of mixing. This is a great example because it's simple. I really only have 3 elements. I have the sample, the drums, and the 808 bass. So it's not a lot of elements you need to worry about leveling all these things and EQing all these things. Most hip-hop tracks, or at least a lot of my early work, tends to be simple like this, track-wise. So for melodic and harmonic elements of any song that don't need the bass frequencies, I tend to just cut all that out. For the sample here, this main part of the sample, the piano, I'm cutting out all the low frequencies. I don't need that. I want to make room for the bass. I want the bass to hit hard, and the kick as well. And this second half of the sample, this sort of B section, it has a lot of low end elements, this cello or bass, and I want to preserve that, so I'm not cutting out any of the low end information for that specific part of the sample. Another thing I do with all harmonic and melodic elements of a song, I'm paying attention to where they sit in the stereo field. I want things to sit wide in the mix because they will be perceived louder than they actually are. So in this case, for the piano, I'm using Ozone Imager to just make the whole thing wider, just turning on the stereoize and just boosting the whole thing. Here's no width, and here's with the stereoize. I'm not only doing this to make this louder and make the beat or the song sound more full, but I'm also doing this because if these elements are mono, they will clash with my vocals. I like to keep my vocals mono. I want them to cut straight through the center, and if this is also cutting straight to the center, they're competing for space. So widening these kind of elements and keeping your vocals mono will allow or allot space within the stereo field for all these elements, and then it just sounds more full. It just sounds better when things are wide. And I did the same thing with the B section. I just widened the whole thing. And I'm not really worried about some elements being out of phase. As long as things sound good, that's all I'm concerned about. When I'm mixing my songs and mastering my songs, the only thing I'm worried about is, do they sound good to me? Mixing is art, mixing is subjective. So it's up to you. If you have a certain sound that you want to achieve, just look to do that. So next, let's move on to the drums. The drums, I kept the drums pretty simple. I'm not even using these sounds. But for drums, I'm just leveling, just worried about levels. How loud is the kick? How loud is the snare? How loud are the hats? And how loud are all those elements in comparison to the rest of the song? So for me personally, I like when my kicks hit hard. I want my snare to cut through. I don't want my snare to be quiet. And hats, I tend to turn them down. I don't really like loud hats. They're just annoying. And also, this hat, I am taking off a lot of the highs. I want this to sound a little bit more lo-fi. And they're not like sharp and piercing. This is just too aggressive. So this all ties back to leveling. Leveling, I think, is one of the most important things. For the 808, I did EQ a bit. I cut off some of the high information, and I cut out all the low frequencies right before the fundamental. I don't need any of this information. I don't tend to do this with a lot of 808s, but for this mix specifically, I was having some trouble with the distortion, so I was cutting out as much low frequency information as I could. So for this, I just brought it up right before the fundamental bass hit. And there were a few people that watched the music video and asked how the bass, how did I get my bass so wide? And what I'm doing the same thing, ozone imager, and just stereoizing the bass. And for this specifically, I left the sub frequencies mono, and I'm widening the higher frequencies, keeping all the sub frequencies mono. You hear that a lot. I tend to do that because not only because clubs and stuff play things in mono, and not only because people say that, but a lot of times widening the sub frequencies of a bass sound or an 808 sound don't always end up making the track sound good. So I kept the sub frequencies mono and these higher frequencies stereo. And you don't need these to be like, you're feeling the sub frequencies and you're hearing the high. I mean, you're hearing everything, but you're feeling this and you're hearing this more. So I'm widening this for that reason, for all those reasons. So here's the sub frequencies completely mono, and then the high frequency information is being widened. And I'm just doing everything under 300, keeping that mono. Everything 300 and above is being widened, and that kind of gives for a nice wide bass. Though it also makes the bass feel full. It hits harder. Having a straight mono bass, you can hear the difference. This sounds a lot more full, and it allows for this whole instrumental just to feel better, more full, louder, perceived loudness. Now let's move on to the vocals. I do have my master chain turned off, so when we get to that part, I will turn it on and we'll do a little A and B. But for the vocals, let's hear what the vocals sound like without any processing on them. Obviously, they're going to be quiet. So let's just walk through my vocal processing chain here. So the first thing I'm doing, I will say too, while I'm recording, when I'm just trying to get levels, I don't record with any processing on my vocals unless it's reverb or I'm doing something that requires that. But when I'm doing just straight rap stuff, I'm rapping with no processing on my vocals. I'm just using utility to adjust my levels right so that I can sit well in the mix while I'm recording. But when I mix, I'll turn the utility off. So for the vocal chain, I start off with OTT. These are the default OTT settings. If you have Ableton, you can look up OTT. It's under the multi-band compressors. I'm just turning down the amount to 20% because I don't need everything fully OTT'd out. If you want to hear what 100% sounds like, I don't need them. Just sounds like doo-doo. I'm not going to go through every single parameter for every single part of my vocal chain. I'm going to go through the things I changed, and I will be uploading my vocal chain and my mastering chain to my Patreon for free. So follow me there, and I'll have Ableton stock versions of my vocal chain and my master chain in case you don't have all the plugins I have. But for my vocal chain, I'm using all Ableton stock stuff except for this Pro Q3, and you could really just replace this with an EQ8. I have, really this should be on natural phase, and I'm just cutting out the low information, boosting a little bit of the high stuff for my vocals. Everybody's voice is different, so everybody's going to have a different EQ band. I find this EQ to work well with my voice, and The main thing that I'm always worried about is just cutting out the low information. I'm always trying to clear up room for the bass because I want the 808s to hit hard, specifically with rap hip hop music. Again, if you're mixing other types of stuff, just take what you can from this. This is just how I personally mix stuff. And this won't apply to everybody, but you can use aspects of this in your tracks. So yeah, for the EQ, I'm just cutting out the lows mainly. OTT is adding a lot of high-end information that I do like for the voice, so I don't need to do too much boosting the highs. And then I have de-esser. This is stock de-esser. I don't think I changed anything, but here are all my settings. And then I just have basic Ableton compressor. I'm just using this compressor to make my vocals sound consistent across the track, just squashing the dynamics. And then the last element to my vocal chain is this parallel compression. If you don't know what parallel compression is, it's essentially mixing or blending an uncompressed signal with a super compressed signal or a compressed signal. So in this case, I have everything that I just previously mentioned running through this dry channel, and then on this wet channel I have this glue compressor fully smashed out, and I'm just using this makeup gain to introduce this compression sound into the vocals. I'm doing this again to just make everything cut through better, bring that high or bring the elements of this compressor forward into the vocals while maintaining the original dry signal. So let's just hear an A and B just so you can get a sense of what it's doing. So here's no parallel compression, and here's with parallel compression. It's essentially just making everything louder and adding in the pure wet sound of this compression onto my vocals. And again, after I completely process my vocals, I am then using the fader here to level the vocals with the track. Again, it all falls back to levels. How loud is this in comparison to the mix?
I don't need him. Push the pressure, I ain't never need him. I was stuck for a couple years, got him in a moment, and I ain't stressing about the set. I don't need.
If you're having trouble figuring out if your vocals are too loud or too quiet, one tip I do use often is I will turn down my mix. I'll turn down all the elements of my track super quiet. You won't be able to hear me turning it down, but I'm turning down my entire track.
I don't need him. Push the pressure, I ain't never need him.
And when I turn down the whole track, if I'm able to hear all the elements cut through nice in the mix, if I'm able to hear the vocals punch through, the bass, the drums, everything, and nothing sounds too quiet or too loud when the whole track as an entirety is quiet, then everything's sitting right.
I don't need him. Push the pressure, I ain't never need him.
So I'm listening right now. I'm going to listen to this track super quiet just to make sure everything is in the right space it needs to be.
I don't need him. Push the pressure, I ain't never need him. I was stuck for a couple years, got.
And again, all this is subjective, so just level your elements out to where they sound good to you. Another thing, if you're having trouble with leveling, another technique I used to use was I would actually convert the whole track, or I would put a utility on and I would make the whole track mono and mix, or not mix, but level everything out in mono so you can hear just how loud everything is, and you can base your levels off that, and then you can introduce all the stereo, or you can turn that off, and then the stereo field will be maintained. But I find that's a good way to level things out if you're having trouble. So let's move on to the master track.
I don't need him. Push the pressure, I ain't never need him. I was stuck for a couple.
For mastering, the only thing I'm worried about is making the track louder. And that is essentially my goal when mastering. If you end up having to mix things while you're mastering, You can do that, but I would recommend going back into your mix and changing things so you're not mixing in the mastering phase. You just want to be making everything louder in the mastering phase. The first thing I do keep on my master rack is this saturator. I keep this saturator on all the time. Anytime I'm making any music, it's not doing anything. I'm just utilizing the soft clip, just to shave off anything that would go above 0. I don't want this to run hot. I don't want it to be red. When I do push things past 0, this track is going above 0. That distortion, sometimes I like that distortion, and having this soft clipper on, first of all, it won't run red, and second of all, it will maintain that distortion. And if you like how the distortion sounds, you can keep it. A lot of the times I am cranking things above 0. I don't want them to run red, so I could put the soft clipper on. It sounds great. So for the entire master chain, the first thing I'm doing is compressing the track. The whole goal for a rap song is to make this as loud as possible. We don't really care too much about maintaining or preserving dynamics. If that is required within the music that you're making, preserve those dynamics. And there are occasions where I am preserving dynamics, but in this case, I'm squashing it. So I'm doing this just to catch peaks, squashing the track. After I compress, I'm using ozone exciter just to bring up some of the higher frequency elements in the track. This is particularly for my vocals and any other elements that I want to be kind of sparkly or shiny or cut through a little better. So we can listen A and B. Push the pressure, I ain't never need him. I was stuck for a couple years, got up in a moment, and I ain't stressing about to say I don't need him. Just exciting those high vocals or high end stuff in order to allow them to cut through better. And I am adjusting all these parameters. I am adjusting based on my ear and how I want the track to sound. I want the track to sound this way. I'm not cranking this stuff. See, just very small amounts. And after that, I'm limiting. I use FabFilter Pro L2. Personally, I think this is one of the best limiters. I find that I'm able to make tracks as loud as I want them to be without introducing any unwanted distortion. I have the cleanest tracks with this limiter. This chain, I will replicate this with the Ableton stock limiters. Using Ableton stock limiters with this track in particular, I wasn't able to get the track as loud as I would like it to be. And I have also used in the past Ozone's maximizer. I've run into similar issues with the Ableton stock limiter and Ozone maximizer. I find that sometimes I'm not able to get my tracks as loud as I want them to be without introducing unwanted distortion. But for this particular limiter, I'm able to get the tracks as loud as I want them to be without any unwanted distortion. And again, you can achieve the same results with the Ableton stock limiter. Just depends on the track. Most of the tracks are fine that I've mixed with stock limiters and maximizer. I've gotten as loud as I need it to be. So for this, I'm just gonna brush over my settings real quick. I use the same settings on the limiter for every single track. The style all around. Look ahead, 0.3 milliseconds. The attack is fully maxed. The release is at 0, and these channel linking knobs are both at 0. I'm just adjusting the gain to where I want it to sit. When I'm adjusting this gain, I'm watching my loudness meter, and I'm specifically watching the integrated LUFS. This is a free loudness meter. You'll need to download this if you download my master rack. But if you have any loudness meter, they all do the same thing. But I'm just trying to get this integrated LUFS to negative 8.6 or around negative 8.5. That's my target number for all my tracks. Essentially, I am trying to make my tracks as loud as possible. I don't need him. Push the pressure, I ain't never need him. I was stuck for a couple years, got up in a moment, and I ain't stressing about to say I
don't need them. Pushing pressure, I ain't never need them. I've been stuck for a couple years, got them in a moment of mind stressing about it.
So now we're hitting around negative 8.4, 8.5. That's all I really wanted to hit. And when mastering, I will usually loop the loudest part of the track and master that to my target LUFS. But in this case, this track kind of stays consistent throughout the whole thing. It doesn't really have a super loud part. The chorus doesn't get any louder than the verses, so I just make sure that anywhere in the song it's hitting negative 8.5. But I do tend to master or make the loudest part of the track hit my target integrated LUFS. And that's essentially my mixing and mastering process and my vocal processing chain. If you want to download these, they're going to be free on my Patreon. I'll have the vocal processing chain, the master rack, and I'll have Ableton stock versions of those two processing chains. If you follow me on Patreon, you will have access to all future updates of these chains. I constantly update and change these vocal chains in master racks. Maybe once a year, every 6 months, they change entirely. I have a whole new different process, so look out for any future updates, and I hope this helped. Peace.
I don't need them. Push the pressure, I ain't never need them. I've been stuck for a couple years, got them in a moment of mind stressing about to say. I don't need them. Pushing pressure, I ain't never need them. I've been stuck for a couple years, got them in a moment.